It may be NBA playoff season, but it's always college basketball season on the CBB Central podcast. Kevin and Brad coming to you live from across the country. Kevin out in Evanston, Illinois. Brad out in the Rhode Island, Providence area. Brad, how you doing, man? I've been watching the NBA playoffs all night, taking college basketball questions. It's been a good time. I know you're recording the end of the game because we're recording as the game ends here between the Rockets and the Warriors. But how's it going? Any NBA hot takes for us before we really get going on the big college basketball podcast we've got planned for you guys today?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I mean, the last 6 minutes are going to be in a bit of a time capsule for me. I'm going to stay off Twitter for about this hour and a half that we're chatting, and then going to catch up on and see all these hot takes that the Warriors have ended the NBA, and the NBA is over now for the next 5 years. Let's see if freezing cold takes is going to have a busy night.
Absolutely, yeah. That's been my favorite part of the NBA playoffs so far, is just watching freezing cold takes just blow up. It's a great account on Twitter, so everybody go follow them. I'm sure you all are, but if you aren't, shoot them a follow. We've got a lot of draft decisions to go over. I think that's where we'll start on this show. The draft decision deadline is coming up next week. I believe May 31st is the deadline for all college players to announce whether they are returning to school or remain in the NBA draft and hire an agent. A couple off the bat that chose to make that decision a little early. Josh Okogie, Tyler Davis, and Lamonte Bearden all headed to the NBA early. Okogie wasn't a surprise after his combine performance. Davis, I personally wasn't surprised either coming out of Texas A&M. I didn't expect his draft stock to be all that high, but at the same time, I didn't necessarily see a path for it to get higher other than him magically learn how to shoot threes, which I didn't expect to happen. So he's off to the draft from Texas A&M. Lamonte Bearden was the bigger surprise for me, departing Western Kentucky early to go pro. He's a guy who had a really nice year for the Hilltoppers in his one season there after transferring in from Buffalo. But I think it's just one of those classic scenarios of Bearden should have graduated this spring. I believe that's the case. I don't have a confirmation on that, but I believe he has graduated. He's really just got to improve as a 3-point shooter, and he's going to be a really good pro point guard, whether it's here in the States or overseas. Bearden's a guy, I really like his game. I thought he could have used a year in college to develop, but if you've already graduated, go get yourself paid. I don't have too many problems with that. So Brad, any takeaways from those 3 decisions? We can kind of touch on them individually or kind of as a whole, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there with, Okogie, totally expected. Davis and Bearden, they're not going to get drafted, but when you just take like 2 seconds to think about, their situations, it's really not that surprising. Davis, that traditional kind of back to the basket post player and like a very good roll man in the pick and roll, but his athletic and shooting limitations probably have him on the outside looking in for the NBA, even if he stayed another year at Texas A&M. And then with Bearden, it's a one where you didn't expect coming into the draft to see Lamonte Bearden hire an agent and stay. But when you consider that this was his 4th year in college, he's probably graduated, and he's definitely good enough to play in the D League, maybe even make a summer league team. It's unfortunate for Western Kentucky fans, because if he returned, they would have a borderline or probably extremely worthy top 25 team. But definitely makes sense from a financial perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree on Davis and his kind of lack of fit in the modern NBA. I mean, he's 6'10" and 265 pounds. He's done a really good job getting in shape, but he doesn't block shots. He blocked 1.3 shots per 30 minutes, which is basically what he played this season for the Aggies. He was very productive. I saw a video he had posted on Twitter, his trainer posted on Twitter, that was like, who says Tyler Davis can't shoot? And it was him making like 10 in a row catch and shoot elbow jumpers. And I was like, well, congrats, you can make a catch and shoot elbow jumper in practice. He still can't shoot. And the amount of catch and shoot elbow jumpers he'll be getting in the NBA are quite slim. Regardless, I think he has a place playing professional basketball. I don't think it's in the NBA, but I'm not going to doubt a kid's work ethic. I think he works really hard. He's a good player. He's really improved over his time in Texas A&M. He's the type of kid you want to root for. It's the type of draft decision that kind of stinks for the college, but at the same time, as I said, we have no problem with it. Go and get yourself paid. Bearden's a guy I'm really high on, as I said. I just think he just got to get to a point where he's shooting the ball a little better and he can be an NBA guy. Moving on to some guys who have decided not to be NBA guys or have not decided officially, but are leaning one way or another. We have two where we have strong reporting on guys who are leaning towards the NBA. Dante DiVincenzo, Tyus Battle. Let's kind of touch on each one of these guys individually, Brad, because I think they're both really interesting cases. Dante DiVincenzo blew up at the Final Four for Villanova. Has a chance to come back and be a superstar in college basketball, but had a really nice combine. I think would be drafted in the first round. He appears to be leaning towards the NBA, which I certainly don't blame him for. I think there's room to move your stock up in a way that I will touch on later, but I think a lot of these wings could do. But DiVincenzo is a guy who, he has the upside. He has a lot to work on, but he's got a lot of upside. I kind of break down that decision, Brad, from your perspective, because I think it's probably the right move because he would have come in with so much hype next year. But at the same time, I think there would have been room to really build that stock even higher.
Yeah, so I think he's definitely gone. I mean, once Villanova added Joe Cremo, I think that was when everyone officially knew that he would not be returning because Cremo is not going to sign up to be a backup. He could have literally played for 99%, maybe even higher, of the schools in the country as a starter. There was really no reason to be a backup there. So I think Cremo will, take over that DiVincenzo role. In terms of, I think DiVincenzo's stock could have been higher next year, but I think a good rule to follow as a draft prospect is, once you're projected to be a guaranteed first rounder, you got to go right then. There are some cases like Daniel Gafford where, from our perspective right now, it looks like he went from to be like a 17 to 24 pick in this draft to maybe a top 10 pick next draft. But I mean, people have been projecting, those sort of jumps for forever. I remember people having Thomas Bryant in the top 10 when he chose to come back for his sophomore year. Obviously, he was not even close to that type of player. Even last year with Miles Bridges and Robert Williams, both guys who are going to be drafted between probably 10 and 15 in this draft. And last draft, they probably would have been picked around the same range. But in the preseason, people had both of them around the top 5. So, while DiVincenzo would have been projected as a lottery pick in next year's draft, I think this is definitely the smart move. A lot of people are kind of pushing the narrative that he was totally unknown before this championship blowout, and that's just not true. I mean, you're not going to invest millions of dollars in draft a player off of one game. He's been scouted, throughout his whole Villanova career, and he's been a extremely productive two-way player who should have a nice fit towards the end of the first round.
Right. I think the book on DiVincenzo is that he's not always played under control. He's gotten a little shot happy at times. And, when you're drafting in that late first area, are you looking for that guy or are you looking for a guy who's going to come in and play a very specific role and really be, a good team player and a guy who, really knows how to play the game? Kind of, I touched on Kevin Huerter. We'll get to him a little later in the podcast as well. He was a guy who blew up at the combine as well. Kevin Huerter is a guy who you can just simply plug and play. I think there's a little bit more of a learning curve for DiVincenzo in terms of what shots he can and can't take. There's a reason why Jay Wright did bring him off the bench much of the season between the firepower that they did have and the necessity to kind of rein in DiVincenzo at times, but also allow him to fully fully use all of his scoring capability when he's on the floor. Jay Wright did a really good job of using him. I think he'll definitely need to fit into the right NBA situation. Touching on the other guy who is leaning towards the NBA, Tyus Battle, I think this has kind of been presumed for quite a while. I don't think it's at all surprising that Tyus Battle is going to leave for the NBA. His stock really hasn't moved at all in the pre-draft process. From what I've seen, he hasn't really impressed too much in any combine testing or things like that that I've read about. He was obviously very productive at Syracuse this year, 19 points per game. The efficiency numbers weren't exactly what you want to see, only 40% from the field, 32% from three. Did have two assists, 3 rebounds, and a steal and a half per game, but did turn it over 2.5 times and played 39 minutes a night. I think Battle's your typical two-way wing project piece in the early second round that has a chance to stick on an NBA roster at the end of the bench and probably will spend time bouncing between the D League and the G League and the NBA next season. Is that kind of where you see him, Brad? And do you think there was any reason for him to go back to school?
So I'm much lower on Tyus Battle, even prior to the combine. So I watched every minute of the combine scrimmages, and Battle was one of the 5 worst players there. He was legitimately very bad. And there were a lot of kind of takes floating around that his second day was pretty good because I think he had like 10 points, but it really wasn't. I mean, he struggled handling the ball. He got the ball knocked away multiple times trying to dribble. He couldn't hit outside shots. He got blown by Gary Trent on one play where he was stuck in quicksand and Trent just did a quick rip and went one dribble and got all the way to the rim. But even So I mean, he kind of showed that he was outclassed, I think, as a prospect at the combine. But then even dating back to his time at Syracuse, he was super productive. But I think both Malachi Richardson and Mike Benajay were better players and prospects than Battle. And I mean, both those guys are pretty much out of the NBA. And Richardson was the end of the first round pick. I think he went 21st or 23rd. And then Benajay was like 37th. And I think that, both of those guys I would rather have as a prospect than Tyus Battle. I think Battle, I would say maybe 60-40 he gets drafted, 60% like he'll be a second rounder, 40% undrafted. So in that scenario, I think he probably should stay in the draft in terms of stock. I think his stock could only go down if he returns for his junior season. It is very unfortunate for Syracuse because they would be a top 15 team with him. I mean, he's still a very good college player, averaged almost 19 points a game, but from an NBA perspective, I'm not a huge fan.
With Battle, it's tough because you're pretty much betting on 3-and-D potential, but he hasn't really shown that he's that good a three-point shooter. He was 36% as a freshman and 32% as a sophomore from three. He's gonna have to shoot 38 to 40% in the NBA from three to stick. And I think obviously part of that was he had to force a lot of shots. That offense was mostly a mess. It was just a lot of like, here's Tyus Battle, Frank Howard, and O'Shea Brissett. We're gonna take turns isolating and see what happens. Like I think you have to look at the situation that he was put into. The free throw shooting is a good sign for shooting percentage going forward. He's got 84% this season's 80% a season ago. And then on the defensive end, he had the steal and a half per game, but I don't think he's a plus athlete at the next level. He's not a guy who I think has incredible feet by any means. We haven't seen Syracuse guys really thrive on defense who've played in the zone. I don't think we see Tyus Battle thrive on defense either. So certainly the trepidations are there, but 6'6" guy who can score at 3 levels, have a place. So I do think he finds a way to get drafted. Although I think second round picks, I think there's a lot of guys who just get thrown in the second round pick basket. But between all the international guys that wind up getting drafted and guys who get drafted for whatever reason who weren't necessarily projected to be, there's a lot of guys who were projected on that second round pick line that don't get picked. So Battle's certainly in a little bit of danger of falling out of that draft boards. Guys who are falling off draft boards for this year altogether by returning to school. We have a few guys announced over the last day or so. Admiral Schofield, Sagaba Kanate, Luke May, Kerwin Roach. All four of those guys were mostly expected to come back. I think Kanate had one of the more interesting combines of any player, measuring out pretty poorly, but playing extremely well. And then obviously there was a bunch more players who pulled their names. I know Jalen Walker from Kent State, a bunch of mid-major guys who we knew weren't going to get drafted. Ahmad Rory from Montana, another guy. Guys we didn't expect to get drafted who were just, testing the process, feeling it out, officially announced that they would be returning to school. Any takeaways from those guys? I'm not really surprised by any of them, except for maybe Kanate a little bit, Brad, because I thought he might stay after what he did at the combine. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, if I could just first jump back to the whole second round pick discussion. So, a lot of guys that get picked in the 50 to 60 range, even like the college players, it's often kind of head scratching why, player X went undrafted when he's clearly a superior prospect to, player Y who was drafted in that 50 to 60 range. But at least the story that's often presented to us is that, say the Wizards have the 50th pick and they want to take Tyus Battle, and Tyus Battle doesn't think that he can make the Wizards. So he says, I would rather go undrafted and pick my team. Or the Wizards say, all right, Tyus Battle, we like you, but we don't have any room on our roster. Can you go to Australia for a year, and then we'll get you a 1 year guaranteed deal the year after. And so a lot of times it is in the player's best interest to opt to go undrafted and pick the best situation where they had the best chance of making the team, or even their teams like the Celtics, who even guys that they cut, like they cut Ben Bentel 2 years ago and gave him $250,000 just as a partial guarantee. So it is beneficial sometimes for players to pick their spots, but also at the same time, I think players can say, oh yeah, three teams wanted to draft me between 50 to 60, but I said no, as kind of way to a save face and kind of reject the notion that they were not worthy of being drafted.
Yeah, those are certainly good points. The draft process in the late second round is always very interesting, with guys trying to get drafted and stashed. Two-way deals now is another thing to monitor. I know we saw a couple of years ago, Josh Westis agreed to basically be drafted higher, but not play in the NBA his first year and play in the G League. So there's a lot of kind of finagling that goes around the NBA draft process. We might touch on draft promises a little later and how stupid I think they are personally. We'll kind of touch on those in a bit with Chandler Hutchinson and Mitchell Robinson and those guys. It's kind of just a strange situation, strange whole deal for me. And I'll get to it in a bit, but I just think it's weird that you would promise a guy this early. And if I'm a player, if I'm just going to move on from it, potentially be drafted anywhere else, when we all know that a promise is not like a written thing. It's just kind of like, you're there, we're taking you. Well, if there's a better player there, you may not be getting taken. So certainly it's such a strange system. Any thoughts on those four guys I mentioned before who are headed back to school for another year? Kanate is a guy for me that I really wanted to touch on, hear your opinions of, because I thought after he measured out at, I think it was 6'6.5" with no shoes, I said there's no way he is ever going to play in the NBA. And then I watched his workouts and the way he played at the combine, and I was very impressed.
So I promise that I will answer your question, but I just have one more thing to add, and that was so Rob Doster tweeted the other day, like there's been one player in the past 5 years or whatever, 5 or 6, whatever the time interval was, who was a top 40 pick that didn't get a guaranteed contract. And he said the answer was DeAndre Daniels. And I tweeted at him, Josh Huestis too. No response from anybody sticking up for me, nothing. But I know for a fact that Josh Huestis, as you mentioned, the Thunder drafted him in the first round. He's the only first rounder ever to be sent to the D League without getting that guaranteed NBA contract. But now for the question that I've dodged multiple times already, I completely agree with you about Kanate, where he declares, and I was like, the more I thought about it, the more I could kind of buy him as an NBA prospect. But then the measurements came in. He was very small. I think he was like 6'7" in shoes or something. But I thought his play, like in the scrimmages of the combine, was very encouraging. He was a little wild with his decision making, but I think he flashed a face-up game, which I didn't completely know that he had. He had some pretty skilled moves around the basket, and was his normal, intense, defensive shot blocking, rim protecting presence. I think it's also worth noting that he actually played a good amount of power forward too at the combine, and he didn't look super out of place. He was on the same team as Austin Wiley, and especially the second day where certain players who played really well in the first day chose to sit out the second day, and we saw a Wiley Konate front court, and he was certainly not out of place there. That's because Melvin Frazier didn't play on the second day, which kind of threw off the rotations. But if Konate can return to school and kind of sharpen up that face-up game, maybe play some power forward too. I mean, I think he could certainly get drafted, even though drafted in the 2019 draft, even though he has some physical limitations.
Yeah, I really just can't get over the lack of ability to shoot at all. I mean, he's going to have to shoot if he's going to play the 4 in the NBA, and if he's going to be 6'7", he's going to have to play the 4 in the NBA. He was effective at the combine. I don't rule out his ability to develop as a shooter into something that's playable at the very least. But at the same time, it does become very difficult, at that spot. I think that Jordan Bell type, who's very athletic, do a lot of things defensively. Jordan Bell developed as a shooter over his time in college. In his final year, he barely shot the ball at all from three, but he did take some. He hit a couple of them, and had developed enough of a mid-range game that he was able to stick in the league. I think that's possible for Konate as well, but those measurements really hurt. He's a guy who, if he was 6'9", everyone would be like, that's great. And to me, Konate has no problem getting up to the rim. I don't think, especially in the modern NBA, he'll have too much trouble just because he's a little short. But at the same time, it's kind of the way the league is played out at this point. And so it's an uphill battle at 6'7", but I'll bet on Konate. He's really good.
Yeah, I don't know if he necessarily hit like a high percentage of mid-range jump shots in the combine scrimmages, but I thought his mechanics and his form, it was much more impressive than I was expecting. Kind of similar to a Bruno Fernando. Fernando's free throws looked really good. He even took a three, which he did not hit, but it didn't look crazy. It didn't look super out of place. I think both those guys could potentially have some floor spacing upside. In terms of some other guys who said that they're coming back, I think Admiral Schofield was a huge decision for both college basketball and for the NBA draft. I think he probably would have gotten picked in the second round as kind of a sleeper. He's a multi-positional guy. He's very big, very physical, and can shoot the ball. He can defend. And with him back, I think Tennessee's probably a top 5 team.
Yeah, I'm not quite as high on Tennessee. I've just kind of said that the whole time because I don't really know where they improve, although it's possible that they do, and Quan 4 helps a little bit there. But I see them in that 8 to 12 range, but certainly a big return for Admiral Schofield. Luke May, no one really expected that he'd ever leave. Luke May did the perfect NBA draft testing waters. He didn't announce that he was entering, and then I didn't hear from him once. Like, there was no Luke May is working out with this team, or Luke May is going to the combine, and then it was at the end, Luke May is withdrawing his name. He put his name out there. He didn't make a big deal out of it. Communicated with a couple of teams, got some feedback, headed back to college as we all expected. And then Kerwin Roach, there was kind of mixed feelings the entire process. Was he going to come back? Was he going to stay in school? He elects to or go to the NBA, I should say. He elects to go to stay in school. One more year at Texas, and this backcourt is looking pretty good for the Longhorns at this point. Matt Coleman, Courtney Ramey, this team has some upside in the backcourt now. between Roach and between Roach and everything they have coming back, as well as a good class coming in.
Yeah, I thought Roach was definitely gone based on Texas's roster construction. They have you mentioned Coleman and Ramey at the one. They also have Elijah Long, who is a former Jamion Christian player at Mount St. Mary's, who is one of the best sit-out transfers on the market. They have Jace Febris, who did not have a great year shooting the ball, but he has a shooting pedigree, and he was I think a top 75, maybe even a top 50 freshman. And they have Jared Little on the wing. They have now Roach back on the wing, and we don't know what's going on with Andrew Jones. He could be in the mix. I mean, they just have so many. They have almost too much options, and I think Texas is. I was working on my early top 25 yesterday, and Texas I have kind of in that 20 to 25 range. I think that's I think that they're kind of underrated nationally. I mean, from the 17 or 18 ballots that I saw before, or like right around the NCAA championship, they were either in the teens or they were completely off people's ballots. So I wonder, with a little more clarity with the rosters, if they can sneak into more top 25s.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued with this Texas team. The guards are really good. I'm a big Jericho Sims fan. I think he's going to be pretty awesome there and break out this year. I haven't loved kind of how Shaka's coached this team so far, and I don't know how his defense will transfer. Shaka Smart's teams over the years have won on energy and competition, toughness, hustle, not necessarily on great game planning or offensive strategy. I think he'll now have the guards to overcome that maybe lack of strategy offensively. But it is a bit of a concern for me. I think they certainly could be a top 25 team. I have to really look into that. I'll probably do one right after we get our final NBA draft decisions and just kind of go through all of that. And Texas will certainly be in the conversation. I haven't really decided if I'll put them in.
Yeah, and Dylan Ozakowski is one of my favorite players. I don't know why, but it's just like whenever I watch him, even when he makes a bad play, I'm thinking, they got to get this ball back to Ozakowski. I mean, he's a pretty good passer. He's like a below average 3-point shooter, but was their best 3-point shooter last year at like 31%. And he's a pretty smart player, but he's also very turnover prone. Kind of reminds me of myself. That was kind of my bugaboo as a player. Tons of risky passes and turnovers. That's probably why I wasn't very good, but I can see a lot of my own game in Ozakowski.
Yeah, Dylan Ozakowski's funny. I remember being introduced to him when he was playing at Tulane. I was watching the American Conference tournament the year Ed Conroy was getting fired, and that eventually led to Ozakowski's transfer. And he was a guy who he popped off the page for sure. That team was in a strange spot. They wound up pulling an upset. He was a fun guy to watch. I didn't really know what to expect of him at Texas, and he certainly exceeded my expectations. They really kind of forced him to do a lot that he shouldn't have really had to do just because of kind of the rest of the team's flaws where like we can't shoot the ball and we don't really have a point guard. And so it was like, all right, let's just give Ozakowski the duties. And I think he performed fairly admirably given the situation. I think he can fall more into a glue guy role this year with all the talent that will be there. So that'll be certainly an interesting thing to watch there. One thing we wanted to highlight, that's kind of one of our big things for the show today. 3 guys each we think will make a surprising draft decision one way or the other. I'll let you start, Brad, with your first one. I'm pretty intrigued. I may have some overlap with you. We've kind of had that happen a few times before, but let's see what you got.
Yeah, so like just to clarify, I was approaching this as kind of like 3 predictions of guys that we think could end up shocking some people. So for my first one, Tyler Cook from Iowa. I think he's someone who is not necessarily seen as an NBA prospect. He's not much of a shooter, but he had to play the power forward rather than the center, which is probably his more future position. As a sophomore at Iowa, he put up pretty big numbers. He's a pretty mobile, pretty skilled big man. Around the rim, in the paint. But certain tweets from one of their beat writers from a few weeks ago, where I guess the coaching staff told the beat writer that Cook will have his decision made by June 11th, which is the international deadline. And when I asked this beat reporter if he messed up the dates, he's like, no, this is the date that the coaching staff told me, which leads me to believe that maybe Cook is gone either way, and he's not deciding between Iowa and the NBA, but like overseas and waiting for the 2019 NBA draft or going into this draft. I think he's a sleeper second round pick. I think he will definitely make a summer league team if he chooses to go. But I think he's someone who's kind of under the radar right now.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued kind of by that whole situation. I think there's been kind of like a guess that Cook was leaving, but then since he's not on draft boards, people just kind of assume he's going back to school. I would guess he's gone as well. My first one, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say Kevin Huerter goes back to Maryland. I don't know necessarily why I'm making this call because the stock is so high right now, but I've heard a lot of things. I'm from Kevin Huerter's area. I do follow him quite a bit, so I've tried to consume as much news about him as I can. He's a guy who, he really loves college. From everything that I've ever heard about him, he really loves being at Maryland. He really loves, playing college basketball, and he's not in a rush to go get a paycheck. He has, he has a very good family. They're well off. His brother plays college basketball at Siena College. His dad is the color commentator for Siena basketball games. He's not a guy who, is in desperate need of the paycheck and will rush out and make a brash decision. I think the one thing that doesn't play into Maryland's hands here is that, Huerter won't be playing on the ball. He'll continue to play off the ball. I think he'd be well suited to get more creation opportunities. But I don't see Mark Turgeon doing that over Ant Cowan, who he's always been very high on. I think higher than I am on Ant Cowan. But I think Kevin Huerter will go back to school and try to become a lottery pick in 2019.
And I think if he comes back, I think he will succeed. I had Huerter on my first round, like from the start of the season, ever since watching him on that U19 team. I know that you've had him in a similar place, and all these people that are claiming, Kevin Huerter's combine performance, caused him to fly up the draft boards. Like what are you talking about? He played on one combine. He didn't play on the second day. I mean, this is so much more based on what he accomplished in college and kind of his decision making more than and his shooting ability more than any standout random combine performance.
Yeah, exactly. I think the combine, the big thing for him at the combine was he measured well. He came out at 6'7", which I think was really big. He came out athletically good. And those athletic testing numbers really did kind of solidify what everyone had seen on tape, that yes, he could defend at the next level, that yes, he would have some ability to create his own shot. And so those were really important. We all knew he could shoot the ball. That was no surprise. But to see some of the numbers he put up in the combine testing was really important. I know he interviewed extremely well. So those were certainly huge. I'm going to gamble that he goes back to school. It is as 50-50 a decision as we can. I know he visited with the Utah Jazz. I think the Jazz are picking right around the 20 mark in the NBA draft. And so to me, that could be really interesting if the Jazz were to give him a promise and say, we're picking you. Would he take that and say, I'm going to the league?
Yeah, that'll be such a tough call. I think we mentioned it in the last podcast that so many teams in the 20s need wing players, and the Jazz could certainly use more of like a 3-4 type. But I mean, Huerter with his shooting ability, should be a fit on like numerous teams in that range. Those are some of the better teams that could use a piece to bolster their second unit. In terms of my guy, who I think could surprise, my second guy, I'm going with Ethan Happ leaving. Another guy who was kind of on preseason draft boards, is not on any draft boards anymore. Really struggles with his shot, but he's a very good defensive player, very very smart, high IQ player, a pretty good passer. But the reason why I think that he might leave, similar to the Tyler Cook thing, just kind of reading the kind of roster tea leaves. So Wisconsin went pretty hard after Wyatt Walker, who is a 2-year grad transfer from Samford. And I don't think, well, obviously Walker has committed to NC State, which in hindsight kind of looks like a mistake with Sasha Cleia-Jones going there. His second year of that grad transfer, he could be, staring down a reserve role.
Don't hate on the 2-year grad transfer, Brad.
Well, yeah, you can do the Cullen Neal and the Mauro Sala and do a double grad transfer where
Exactly.
Cullen Neal, he went New Mexico, Ole Miss, St. Mary's, and Sala went Mount St. Mary's, Kansas State, Radford. So I mean, maybe Wyatt Walker will end up finding himself at Wisconsin anyway. But just the fact that they would go after a high profile grad transfer center tells me that they are not super confident in Hap coming back, because the two certainly couldn't play together.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting. There hasn't been a ton of buzz about Hap, but I think there's a very real chance that he's just go pro. Another guy who I'm leaning on my end who could go pro, who I don't think a lot of people expect, but I've kind of just my feeling on the situation based on what I've read and seen is Jalen McDaniels out of San Diego State. I think he's a guy who I've kind of went back and forth whether I think he'll leave or not. At this point, I do think he will. He's really worked. I don't think he's a guy who, he's a freshman. I don't know how much he's going to improve his stock next year. Obviously, he could show really a lot of improvement, but at the same time, he was playing in a situation last year where he had Malik Pope around him. He had, Trey Kell. His supporting cast may not be quite as strong next year. The only thing really needs to improve is just that 3-point shot and some just general game awareness things. But I think he can do a lot of that in pro basketball. He'd be a pretty intriguing two-way guy, which I think he'll do instead of going back to school.
Yeah, I'm a big Jalen McDaniels fan. I mean, he plays with such great energy. He's such an aggressive rebounder, and he's very very athletic for a 4.5. He is going to have that Jonathan Isaac build, that like very slender build, which could limit him in the NBA as a 5. But I think he would definitely get a 2-way if he stayed in. Could also certainly be a second-round pick. I also agree with you that I think that he might be the most 50-50 guy right now, along with maybe Jonte Porter. But those are definitely guys to watch. And then just for my last guy, was kind of stuck between two guys, but I ended up going with Torin Dorn from NC State. He's someone who had a very good year on a surprisingly good NC State team. I think he averaged in double figures and shot a pretty good 3-point percentage. He would figure to be the starting small forward again on NC State, but he would be a 5th-year player, so he's already graduated. And NC State has two, I'll say superior players coming in. Definitely Devin Daniels, the transfer from Utah, is a superior player. Then I'd say that CJ Bryce is as well, who's a UNC Wilmington transfer. Played that small ball 4 for Kevin Keatts at UNC Wilmington. I expect him to do the same. So it would seem that there is some minutes available for Dorn, but the addition of Eric Lockett out of nowhere last week, who's also a grad transfer wing who averaged 14 points a game at Florida International, I think that kind of signals to me that Dorn could be off to start making some money in the G League or overseas.
Yeah, there's been a lot of buzz about Dorn. I don't really think he's an NBA guy. I don't think you do necessarily either, but he's been in college forever. Like when I saw there was buzz that he wouldn't return to school, I was like, wait, Torin Dorn's eligible to return to school? Like for a second, I had to do like the double take of like, he's still in college, because it felt like he'd been here forever. But Dorn, I think that's a pretty good call. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he does head pro.
So Dorn and Keyshawn Woods, I think, played for Allen Major at Charlotte, which was that's two coaches ago for them, right? Because they had Mark Price, and now it's Ron Sanchez.
Absolutely. Good tidbit. Where are we going to find better tidbits than on this podcast? Me and Brad always cutting it up. My final sleeper that will make a decision we don't expect is a mid-major guy. Mac should have been player of the year, but wasn't. Isaiah Reese out of Canisius. This is just a gut feel that he will either go to the NBA or go to decide to transfer and head to a different school and go to a bigger program. This is a guy who, he averaged 17 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 2.2 steals, shot 46% for the field, 36% from three, 88% from the free throw line. He was terrific this season for Canisius, perhaps the most improved player, I might argue, in college basketball this season. And he's worked out with the Nuggets and the Celtics. I think he'll probably have one more workout before the decisions. The fact that a mid-major guy who's only a sophomore is getting that level of workout interest kind of tells me in the tea leaves that there's some thought that he could leave. There's certainly some upside there. I wouldn't be surprised if he either decides to go pro or, he gets in that feedback, oh, we'd love to see you at a higher level. And he takes that to mean I need to transfer from Canisius, who loses their kind of his 1-2 punch guy with big man Jermaine Crumpton. He's a senior. He graduated. Canisius looks to be probably the third or fourth best team in the MAC, certainly a solid club, but not one, that'll contend for a title next year. So for that reason, I think there's a pretty decent chance you see Reese go pro or go to a bigger program.
Yeah, so are there any other guys that you wanted to kind of point out as like maybe that they could go or stay unexpectedly?
Well, I'm still in on the Martin twins staying in school. I know you're not. We've had this debate several times on this podcast.
I'm getting a little nervous though.
I'm excited to hear what happens with those guys. There's no draft decision I'm looking forward to more than that one, because it'll be bananas if they get those dudes back, because that Nevada team is so good. Those guys,
they both were pretty horrible at the combine. Cody was better than Caleb was pretty bad, and I was watching them and I'm like, these guys aren't going to get drafted. Like, oh, I'm going to get destroyed. When they get the feedback that they're not going to get drafted, then they come back. But I mean, I think that we should save the Oregon versus Nevada topic that I proposed to you earlier today for when they officially come back or not. But I mean, that would be crazy. I mean, they both graduated. I mean, Nevada's kind of filled their minutes with guys like Ehab Amin, and Jordan Brown. So, I mean, that would be certainly a unprecedented move there.
Yeah, it would be completely crazy if those dudes come back. I don't know, Brad, have you been tagged in Old Takes Exposed yet for one of these takes? And do they have you locked up in case in their vault of horror if the Martins do come back?
No, I don't think that I have enough Twitter followers for that. But I mean, the Nevada fans were very adamant that they were going to come back so they could have fun and make the Final Four. Which I think if they come back, I don't think that's the reason, but they could very well be 100% correct on the result that they come back. I don't buy that one would come back and the other wouldn't. But maybe this is me now having a second take that's going to be wrong about Nevada. So maybe I should just shut up and move on.
Yeah, let's move on real quick. Last quick topic on NBA decisions before we kind of whip around some NCAA transfer rumors, some news rumors, and some 2019 recruits. Nothing too major on those fronts, but we do want to touch on some things before we wrap ourselves up. Mitchell Robinson and Chandler Hutchison skipped the combine. Many other players sat out 5-on-5. A few other guys skipped the combine, like Robert Williams. The draft game is kind of weird. I mentioned it earlier with the promises. I think it's stupid that teams promise guys when they know things could change. But I don't know who's managing Mitchell Robinson and told him it was a good idea after not playing college basketball for a year to not talk to any NBA teams, but he's listening to some strange people.
Yeah, but I think that Robinson is the perfect guy to receive a promise from an NBA team, because the promise should be for someone who kind of has like a little bit of mystery to them, and one team really likes them. Like the rumor is that the Lakers with a 25th pick, which would be kind of on the low end of where Robinson is projected as a draft prospect. But if you're the Lakers, I mean, you're taking this big swing. I mean, you clearly believe in him, and you don't want him to go to workouts with other teams and show the ability that you think that he has and shoot up the draft boards. So you just want him to shut it down. With the Chandler Hutchinson thing, that's the stranger one, because he's a senior, he's a proven commodity. So there's really no reason to hide him from other teams unless you think that his workouts are going to be so good that like he's going to shoot up. Which, I mean, he's a senior. People are saying that the promise for Hutchinson came in that 18 to 22 range. People think the Bulls at pick 22, which, I mean, if you really prefer Hutchinson to like the Herter, Okogie, Frazier kind of group, I guess promise him, but you would think that you would want an option there for the Bulls.
Yeah, I don't necessarily get it from an NBA perspective. I get it why Hutchinson would do it. I know there's been some kind of debate about his stock recently. I've seen some kind of draft Twitter people. Jackson Hoy from over at the Steppians, one of the guys I follow, he does a pretty good job covering the NBA draft, and he's kind of down on Hutchinson. Hutchison, I keep calling him Hutchinson. I apologize to good old Chandler, one of my favorite guys over at Boise State. But they've talked about him, not great shooter, not going to be an above average defender. What is his stock in the NBA other than being able to attack closeouts really well and kind of dribble drive? I could see him wanting to take a promise and the Bulls being like, okay, let's do this thing, and then missing out on a guy like Herter, a guy like Okogie, who has a chance to skyrocket past him. So I think that's kind of that's where Chandler Hutchison would be coming from. Anything else on guys sitting out, complaints about guarantees / promises that you want to touch on? NBA draft talk in general, Brad, before we wrap up that section of our show.
Yeah, so in terms of the promises, I remember I think either John Gavoni or Woj gave a story from I think 2 drafts ago where Isaiah Cordinier, who was an international shooting guard prospect, who was supposed to be a second-round pick. Supposedly he had a promise in the early second round. That's the only reason why that he stayed in the draft. And then that team reneged at the last minute. And it's different for an international guy where like you can, he could have easily returned. Like he was never even going to come over in the first place. But the fact that he stayed in the draft early was kind of doing this team a favor because maybe he has a good year in Europe and he could move into the first round. Like there was no rush, no timetable for him. He was already making money over in Europe, but he stays in the draft. The team backs out on the promise, and it was, quote, very ugly. So they had never released what team reneged, but he ended up going to the Hawks. In a summer league, he wasn't very good at all, but that was an interesting story about broken promises. And then in terms of guys who sat out, I can see why Trayvon Duvall sat out and Hamidou Diallo and even Anthony Simons. I'm not sure why Malik Newman sat out. I don't know if that's a injury thing because, I mean, he's not like one of these unknown high upside guys. Also wanted to mention I got very triggered on Twitter on Thursday because people were tweeting out that Tony Carr had won the combine. Like he had this great performance. And I watched the whole game and I'm like, there's no way he even scored. I couldn't remember a time that he even scored. And people are like, oh, he won. And then I checked the box score and it said he had 15 points on 6 for 22 shooting. I was like, maybe I missed a couple baskets, but there was a 0% chance that Tony Carr took 22 shots in this game. And it was an error in the box score. He was 0 for 2. He didn't even play in the second half, which is what I thought. And Javon Carter totally shut him down. So anyone who said that Tony Carr was a winner of the combine, you were exposed as you didn't watch the game. You just tweeted out the box score. And then lastly, Billy Preston not playing was shocking because he's not going to get drafted. He has nothing to lose. I mean, it's not like Anthony Simons who could fall from this late first, early second to out of the draft if he plays poorly. Even guys like Diallo and Duvall could fall from second undrafted. Preston had nothing to lose, didn't play anyway. That was very surprising.
Yeah, it was pretty weird. Brian Bowen played. I thought that was kind of interesting. He's in a tough spot because the NCAA hasn't cleared him yet, and he has to make a decision soon. And there's no reason to go to back to college if you aren't going to be able to play. And I don't know that the NCAA will ever let him play, but at the same time, like he's just stuck. The NCAA needs to either make a decision one way or another for the kid. It's really unfair that they kind of put him out in this spot. That's kind of all I'll say there. I know he was kind of overmatched in combine action, but I think he's a chance to stick in the league eventually. He just needs time.
Yeah, he was the worst player by a pretty wide margin. I mean, you had guys like Kostas Antetokounmpo, who was clearly super lost on offense, but showed some flashes on defense. And like Brandon McCoy was horrible the first day, was fine the second day. I mean, Bowen was consistently like the worst player in that 5-on-5 session.
Tough spot for Brian Bowen, who I've started to feel bad for. I truly think it wasn't him, organizing these payments. I think it was family members, and it's not like he was the only one who received a payment. Many have before, many will after. He just got caught as the poster boy of the biggest scandal in college basketball history. And so for that reason, he's just kind of stuck and screwed. And so I feel a little bit for the kid. Speaking on the NCAA, couple of college basketball just news and rumors. We are a college basketball podcast, so we do try to do as much of that as we can, even in the offseason. Kelvin Sampson, rumored as a candidate for the Orlando Magic. Tom Izzo's name briefly mentioned. Sources have told, I believe it was Graham Couch of a Michigan media outlet, that Izzo isn't going anywhere. But at least with something to monitor, I thought there was a small chance it would happen. Sampson would leave Houston in a really tough spot. He has kind of really built this program with a lot of momentum. They have a new facility. I would think they'd hire from within and hire his son, but it would be really interesting if they do lose Kelvin Sampson. Any thoughts there, Brad?
Yeah, I think that Houston is a sneaky good team for this year. They obviously lose Rob Gray and they lose Devin Davis, but they get Corey Davis back, who kind of had a surprise year as a shooting off guard. Galen Robinson's a pretty good pass first point guard, and they're getting 2 junior college transfers, Dejan Giroux and Bryson Gresham. Both were top 150 recruits. Giroux was actually top 50, and they started their careers at UMass. And Giroux's not a shooter, but he's like a very good kind of bigger guard who can score, who can create, and Gresham gives him another body in the front court to go along with Breon Brady and Fabian White. So I think this with the state of the AAC, I would not rule out Houston as a AAC title contender. So losing Kelvin Sampson would obviously be a crushing blow, especially because they could lose some of their recruits. They also have a top 100 recruit coming in, Nate Hinton, who's like a big 6'5" kind of point guard ball handler type, kind of like a wing slash point guard type. So Houston certainly has a lot to lose. I agree that Tom Izzo is mentioned with almost every NBA coaching job every year, it seems. So I would not put too much stock into that rumor.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. Let's kind of touch on some notable transfers. A bunch of mid-level names popped this week, so we'll just kind of hit them real quick. I'll hit you with a name. You can give me your thoughts, Brad. I'll give you mine. Ike Obiago to Seton Hall. Tony Skinn, the new assistant for Seton Hall, has good Nigeria connections. That pays off in recruiting. Obiagu, the transfer from Florida State, high shot blocking upside. Really like the future front court between Obiagu and Torian Thompson. I think they negate each other's weaknesses extremely well, with Thompson being such a porous defender, especially if Thompson can improve as an outside shooter.
Yeah, I was super excited for this pickup. He was underutilized at Florida State, kind of split that center position between John Mark, Chris Kumaji, and Mfiondu Kabengele. And I think he will certainly play more at Seton Hall. You made an excellent point about his fit with Torian Thompson, who's not much of a willing defender. Also splitting the center position between Obiagu and Sanju Mamukelashvili. Also, two guys who are contrasting styles and will give you a different look. And then when you pair in Valdir Manuel, who's like a kind of a rebounding energy four-man, that's a really nice future front court. I know that there are some rumors that Manuel might not qualify, but maybe when Obiagu is eligible in 2019, maybe Manuel will be too. I'll give you the next one, Kevin. Thoughts on Denzel Mahoney, the wing from Southeast Missouri State to Creighton?
I have two major thoughts on Denzel Mahoney. First of all, I have never seen so many fans tweeting at a recruit complaining that they're transferring up than Denzel Mahoney. I didn't know Southeast Missouri State had a fan base, but it seemed like them and the entire Ohio Valley came out in full bore criticizing Mahoney about his decision to leave, which I thought was tasteless. It was quite interesting to watch how they were like, well, Cameron Payne and Isaiah Kanan both made the NBA out of the Ohio Valley Conference. There is no reason to transfer up. And I was like, there's a reason to transfer up in that those are two guys who made the NBA and been not unsuccessful. Whereas if you go to the Big East where he heads to Creighton, they literally make it every year. It was mind-boggling to me. But Mahoney's a guy who's been awesome at SEMO for 2 years. This year, 19 points, 5 rebounds, 1 assist, shot 50% from the field, 41% from three, 84% from the free throw line. So, scoring at all three levels was always good. On a team that he was the primary option, to be that efficient is always a good sign. 6'4", he can play the two. Greg McDermott's been on a lot of transfers, finally gets his man. So exciting pickup for the Blue Jays.
I mean, given Creighton's roster construction, I think he could play some small ball four. I mean, I know that Ballack played a lot of small ball four this year and was pretty ineffective from a defensive perspective. But I mean, Mahoney seems like a better athlete, better defender than a Ballack. So maybe we'll see a lot of like Mintz, Alexander, Ballack, and Mahoney as like four perimeter players around Krompel and Epperson at that center position. Who do you think got more shit for their transfer decision? Malachi Flynn, Matt Mooney, or Mr. Buckner or Mr. Mahoney?
I think Malachi Flynn was only just that one dude, but that was a really mean guy. Denzel Mahoney was just like random OVC bloggers, which was just quite weird. I'll say just in volume, probably Flynn or Mooney. But there was a vocal minority of Ohio Valley fans really angered by Denzel Mahoney's blasphemous decision to leave their storied conference that produces a 15 seed every year. Anthony Tark to UTEP. Rodney Terry's cleaning up. He's doing a great job. I thought Tark was a high major kid, 15.6 rebounds, very athletic kid, will develop as a shooter during his redshirt year. This is an awesome pickup. Chooses them over Maryland and South Alabama. UTEP basketball is back. This program is going to be really good in 2 to 3 years because Rodney Terry's recruiting his brains out, and I think he's really taking advantage of that strong fan base that UTEP has. It's one of those programs that's been down for a bit, but has that strong fan base. So it has kind of a unique upside. He was frustrated, I think, by the lack of fan support at Fresno State. So he can really feed off that here at UTEP and build something special.
Yeah, I was surprised that he didn't go to Maryland because I guess that he's from Maryland, but there is a lot of uncertainty between, Mark Turgeon is certainly going to be on a ton of hot seat lists. You don't know what's going on with Kevin Huerter, even though, I mean, it seems unlikely that Huerter will be there for his senior year, which would be Tarky's, I think, junior season. But then they also have Aaron Wiggins on the wing, who's a very highly rated recruit. So I think UTEP is the safer option. It is worth noting with all these sit-out transfers that they will have the opportunity to grad transfer for their 5th year. So I mean, if Tarky, he sits this year, then his fourth year in college, he has another good year. Maybe if he wants to go closer to home, he could take another shot at Maryland. It is tougher for up transfers who have to sit out, because like you look at Elijah Long, where he commits to Texas, where it looks like he'll get a lot of minutes, and then now Kerwin Roach stays. They get Courtney Ramey pretty unexpectedly. So a lot can change over that year.
Yeah, I think there's been I think this year we've seen some normalization with the transfer market, especially sit-out guys from lower major conferences. I think last year and the year before, it was just like, okay, you averaged 13 points a game. We're taking you, and we'll just have you sit out a year and then be a role player. I think we've seen this year, both from a player side and from the coaching recruiting perspective, teams are kind of normalizing and understanding what the right level is for these kids. This is a perfect example for me. Tark's going to go there, and he's going to average at least 12 points a game, probably more, in my opinion. I think he's a stud for his 2 years at UTEP, assuming he plays both of those years there. Whereas if he headed to Maryland, was just a kind of a decent role player, it may not be quite the same impact. So good to see a kid, get to go to a rising program, have a chance to be a star. They're really excited about him down there. DeMonte Buckingham to Cal State Bakersfield. That dude's going to wreck the league. I tweeted that before. Like, he is just going to demolish the WAC. That kid was special in the A10, and like the size barrier that he hit sometimes in the A10, he won't hit in the WAC. He had some disciplinary trouble at Richmond that led to his dismissal. I heard maybe some drug test potential issues, unable to pass a drug test, led to his demise there. But resurfaces at Bakersfield. Not really sure how it worked out that he wound up there, because I thought there were some better options for him out there. But I'm not going to complain if I'm a WAC basketball fan, because he's going to win WAC Player of the Year as a junior. That's a hot take.
Yeah, another guy who I was surprised moved down a level was Brandon Cyrus, who committed today to Santa Barbara. Joe Pasternak is building quite the mid-major program over there. But I thought Cyrus, he's that prototypical kind of small ball four. He played a lot of 3 and a lot of 4 at DePaul as a sophomore this year. I thought that with this move toward having that more perimeter oriented 4-man, even though he's not a shooter, I think that he could have stayed at the high major level. But in his Final 5, I know that Maryland had interest, and I know that Arizona State had interest. But he's going to play. He's going to put up numbers here, and Santa Barbara's going to be one of the better mid-major teams over the next few years.
Yeah, they're loaded. Pasternak's really smart, because they're going to win 25 games this year. They're going to win 25 games the year after that, and then he'll move up and get whatever Pac-12 job he wants. He can just kind of wait until he gets one. And UCSB is in a good spot, because they'll just hire John Riley, who's their associate head coach, came from Boise State. The guy's a stud in the coaching business. It just shows, what one really good coaching hire can do, because UCSB won 6 games this season before Joe Pasternak took over. Year 1, they went over 20 games. He's recruiting his tail off. And now this job that was, obviously it had upside being in Santa Barbara, that was kind of seen as a Big West job that leaks down. How good a job is this? Pasternak takes over, recruits his brains out, and all of a sudden, in 1 year, this is an elite mid-major program for the next 5 years, in great shape for the future.
Yep. So I'll just quickly hit the last 3 notable transfers. First one, Elbert Robertson, kind of a blast from the past. He was a top 75 recruit in the class of 2014. Went to LSU. Barely played. He's like a wide body, like a Josh Smith sort of center. He's headed to Old Dominion for his last year, which I'm not exactly sure how he will fit. That's a very guard-oriented team, and he's like the polar opposite of Trey Porter, who was a center last year. But either way, Old Dominion is a very good team on paper. They'll be in that top 4 of Conference USA, and they will make a push for the top. Second is Ty Wynyard, former Kentucky big man who never played very much, the New Zealand native. He's off to Santa Clara. He has to sit a year, and I think then he'll have 2 years remaining. We know nothing about how good that he will be, so this is a total wild card move for Santa Clara. But if if you're going to try to move up in the WCC and challenge the St. Mary's, Gonzaga, and BYU trio, these are the moves that you have to make. And then lastly, Zach Dawson. He's like a bigger point guard, former top 100 recruit who went to Oklahoma Oklahoma State rather as a freshman. He's off to South Florida. Another team taking a big swing here.
I'll touch on the Wynyard one first because I'm excited about it. I thought this was like a sneaky awesome pickup. If I'm being completely honest, I watched him probably 3 times when I was bored over the summer last year and watched FIBA U19. Average 14 and 9 for that New Zealand team. Now, obviously, it's difficult to play comparisons on stats because you don't want to compare what he did for New Zealand, which was him and a bunch of mid-level D1 prospects. Compare it to a team like the Canadian team, which had Lindell Weggington, it had Abu Kajab, it had RJ Barrett, or like the US team, which was so loaded. But Wynyard had some really good games, kind of similar to what Rui Hachimura did, where Hachimura was expected to do it all. I think this is a good gamble. I think he's going to be at least rotation level player at Santa Clara and perhaps quite a bit more. So I'm all in on this gamble if I'm Santa Clara. Not too much to add on the other 2 guys that you mentioned. I think both have a chance to be pretty good. Dawson's the type of gamble that Brian Gregory needs to make at South Florida. And Robertson is a tough system fit. I agree with you there. But Old Dominion's had some success taking high major transfers and developing them into system players. So they play a strong defensive style. We'll see what they can do there.
Okay, and then some notable 2019 recruits. I think the most notable one might be Romeo Weems, who was a top 50 kind of a wing / small ball 4 kind of player who's off to DePaul. A lot of people were thinking Michigan State was the team to beat until about 2 days prior to his commitment, and he chose to go to DePaul, where there will be plenty of playing time, for him to enjoy. Not sure if Dave Lato will still be there as the coach, depending how this year goes. But I mean, looking at DePaul's roster for this year, there's no space available, but he would fit perfectly as a small ball power forward. And if he is able and interested to reclassify, DePaul might not be that bad this year.
DePaul wasn't that bad this past season. Obviously, their record wasn't good, but
they were 99 in KenPom.
Right, they competed in almost every game they played. They weren't just getting blown out the entire season. Dave Lato the guy? I don't think he is. I don't think most people really think he is. But at the same time, it's like I don't want to hate on DePaul too much because I don't think they were that far away. Now, is there a path to them being any significant amount better? I mean, they have to win close games. Max Strus has to come back. I don't know if that's been officially announced. Femi Olajobi has to be pretty good. Justin Roberts has a lot of potential, and that's a nice piece in Weems for sure going forward. I just don't think he's the guy to build this program, and so it's kind of a tough thing because you're stuck in purgatory. You either fire the coach, but then you pay a massive buyout and kind of screw yourself, especially when you have an AD that's not very good. Plus, you potentially set the new guy back by having a lot of guys leave, but you're not good enough that you just know it's not the guy, and so you have this kind of just difficult balance. Weems is an interesting piece, though, for them going forward. Hashtag Lato forever. That's all I got on him. I'm as excited to see Paul Mulcahy. Might have mispronounced that guy's name, but he's kind of a 6'6" general who really sees the floor well, commits to Rutgers, in-state talent, types of battles that Coach Peichel has to win. Northwestern was involved. Several other high major programs were involved, but Mulcahy looks to stay home. I believe he was, primarily recruited by Armand Gates at Northwestern, so it's not a surprise that maybe they fell off the map a little bit in his recruitment at the end. But Gates was a guy who did a lot of recruiting legwork for the Cats, so not a huge surprise that he doesn't go to Northwestern. Plus, he wouldn't have necessarily had the inside track to start a point guard, whereas he will at Rutgers. So, all considered, a logical decision for Mulcahy, who's kind of a debated prospect in the 19 circles. Some people have him as 4-star. Some people have him 3. Some people think he's a top 100 type talent. Others see him more in the 150 range. But a nice pickup regardless for Steve Peichel and Rutgers. Hashtag believe in Steve.
Yeah, I also just wanted to point out too about Romeo Weems, where like we have to mention that DePaul had Tiger Campbell locked up as a commit. He's obviously going to UCLA, not DePaul. They had Shane Larkin at one point. They had this guy Walter Pritchford too, I think, who was a pretty good player at Nebraska, who was like a fringe NBA guy by the time he left Nebraska. And they were heavily rumored to get Brian Bowen last year. So I mean, we got to see if Weems even makes it to campus at this point.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily count on it because DePaul basketball doesn't get nice things. But we'll see what happens. I really hope. I don't want DePaul to be bad forever. I'd love to go to a DePaul game and be excited about it and not be like, I'm checking off an arena from my list. But for now, this is where they are. They're just kind of stuck, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's just it's just so tough to jump all these teams in the Big East. It's such a balanced conference.
Exactly. It's such a tough league to win in. A couple more recruits to touch on really briefly before we wrap up this show. Is pushing on past 70 minutes. Thank you all for bearing with us as we ramble about college basketball. We would want to do nothing else in the world. Elias King, 2019 small forward to Xavier. Isaiah Mobley headed to USC. His brother Evan Mobley, I'm pretty sure it was Evan. I had that written down, and I lost my sheet of paper that I had it written down on. He's headed to USC. USC is doing a really good job recruiting that area in Southern California, kind of taking it over from UCLA, the historic program area. Super impressive to see what Andy Enfield's done, especially post the FBI scandal, where a lot of programs have started to struggle recruiting that were involved.
Yeah, so with both King and Mobley, it kind of shows how important getting these big time recruiters on your staff. Like, however you could get this connection to the players. Enfield hires Mobley's dad, and then gets these two sons of his who are very highly rated recruits. And then Xavier with Elias King, they hired Jonas Hayes, who has a lot of ties in the Georgia area, former Georgia assistant, which is where King is from. And I would expect Xavier to be a player in a bunch of other Georgia native recruitments going forward.
Yeah, assistant coaching is the game. I know we saw with Oshun Osaniyi, who signed with St. Bonaventure over Syracuse and Georgetown. The next day, the assistant who recruited him at LaSalle was officially hired at St. Bonaventure. And I was like, gee, that can't be a coincidence.
Yeah, I saw that too, and I texted my friend who is a Syracuse fan. But I guess the Syracuse beat writer was saying that Syracuse lost out because the Bonnies don't have any big men, but they did have big men. So I don't know what was going on there. Some revisionist history there.
Now, update, St. Bonaventure pays players. That's the real reason why Syracuse and Georgetown lost on that recruit. Yeah. Look it up. Run it to the bank. If a big program loses the recruiting battle, it's always because the other guy was paying. And learn the rules, guys. This is how college basketball works. Brad, anything you wanted to touch on before we wrap this baby up?
I think that was a pretty comprehensive.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for bearing with us through our NBA draft decision/criticisms of the promise process. Thank you for joining us. Keep tweeting us college basketball questions, things you want touched on. Keep Twitter buzzing, man. College basketball Twitter gets boring in the offseason. I saw too many tweets of Chris Paul shimmying on the floor in the middle of the third quarter. I'm just kind of done with it. So tweet me college basketball stuff so I don't see that, so I don't see NFL politics. Let's have a good time on Twitter this week. Send me whatever questions you've got. I was taking questions earlier. I'll probably take questions again this weekend because I'm pretty free. Enjoy your Memorial Day. When we're back with you, we'll probably have some combine decisions. It should be an exciting time. Always thank you for joining us on the CBB Central podcast. Have a good night.